You're listening to the Sisters-in-Laws podcast, a faith-based podcast that spotlights Black women who replace silence with storytelling around pregnancy and infant loss and infertility. Black women experience miscarriage and stillbirth 4 to 5 times more likely than white women, according to the NIH and CDC. Whether you've experienced a miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth, are trying to conceive, or have an infertility diagnosis, you will learn about resources and strategies to heal, gain clarity, peace, hope, and find an empowering path forward after loss. I'm your host, Erica M. McAfee, and you will hear me interview sisters-in-laws who have healed from such a painful and traumatic experience by sharing their testimonies and stories to inspire and help others turn their pain into their purpose. Now let's get started. All right. Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so I am a mom, I am a wife, a military wife, and I'm a therapist by training. And I've found my way specializing in helping couples and individuals who have been coping with fertility and loss.
Awesome. But you have your own story. So I would love for you to share your personal journey to motherhood and your loss story.
I do. So my husband and I, we married in 2012. And being a military family, we decided to give trying for a family some time. I had been diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome early as a teen. So I always knew my cycles were going to be irregular, and maybe building a family might be, I might have some trouble. So we decided to, after a couple of years of being married, we decided to try and move forward with building our family. It wasn't happening, which wasn't a surprise for me. And so we were quickly moved along and were referred to a fertility specialist who recommended that we go to IVF. And so in 2014, we did our first round of IVF and were able to have a twin pregnancy, a boy and a girl. And so that was just going from an unknown, if I could have a family, to having twins. We were over the moon. We felt like we had struck gold first try, moving along to, our everyday lives. Pregnancy was pretty good. I had the normal morning sickness, but overall I felt really good. I did acupuncture through the fertility treatment. So one day I was coming home from a acupuncture treatment, driving home, and arrived home and realized that something wasn't right. And I called my husband. He came home and I was bleeding. I couldn't stand up. And so we called the paramedics. They rushed me to the military hospital, and they realized that my cervix was opening and they saw a sac that was bulging. And so they did some consultation with specialists and concluded that there was nothing that they could do at that point, and I would have to deliver the babies. So we did. We delivered our little boy and our little girl on that night. And it really shook us to our core to go from complete bliss to complete catastrophic loss. And so we found a way to heal, and we found a way to be bold enough to go back. We actually had embryos left over from the very first cycle. And so we went back in 2016 and went through a frozen embryo transfer. That transfer led to a baby boy. And as a preventative measure, my high-risk specialist decided that they were going to do a cervical cerclage at, I believe it was between 14 and 16 weeks. I think it was 14 weeks. And so I felt safe. I felt that they very much were trying to do something because there was nothing that they knew. They chopped it up to the twin loss it's something that happens with twin pregnancies. There really wasn't any explanation for that loss. They said that this was something that unfortunately happened. I can't really say that we accepted that, but we had no choice. And with them making a plan to place a cerclage for any other pregnancy, I felt that they were helping me with providing extra security so that that wouldn't happen again. So after having that cerclage done, a week later, I just started feeling that something wasn't right. And long story short, about a week later after having that cerclage, one night I was home and my water just broke. And my husband rushed me to the ER. And understandably, that was traumatic. That was something that he and I thought that we had resolved. And we get to the hospital, and again, they told us that there was nothing we could do. And I had to deliver my baby boy. So we really contemplated whether or not we wanted to move forward with having a family. I felt a lot of guilt. I felt a lot of feelings of why this was happening to me. What did I do wrong? Why was my body broken? I had all my friends who had kids, and I had found the love of my life, and building a family, I never knew it would be this difficult. So I found a way to work through that immense amount of pain that we were in. I did a lot of research. I found a community of women who had cervical insufficiencies and really educated myself about what was out there as a measure to treat this condition. I had not been diagnosed with incompetent cervix officially by my providers, but I sought it out because I felt that enough was enough. And when I reached out to a provider in Chicago by the name of Dr. Arthur Haney, he specializes in permanent cerclages. It's called a Transabdominal Cerclage. He's amazing. He is amazing. He explained everything that was going on with my body, and he gave me answers that I had never been able to receive from any other provider. So my husband and I, after much convincing, we made the decision to fly to Chicago and have the surgery. It seems a bit extreme to fly to Chicago, but what I learned was this is what I needed to feel that I was in good hands. There were providers in California, which is where I'm located, that did the surgery, but looking at how many procedures Dr. Haney performed in his bedside manner, I really felt that I couldn't go through another loss, not due to my cervix. And so my husband and I, after waiting some time to heal from that surgery, we went back and we still had another embryo. We placed that embryo in and we're pregnant. That pregnancy, understandably so, was full of anxiety, full of fear, full of my body is going to let me down again, doubt. And I fought through that pregnancy. I fought through that pregnancy with support. I fought through it with prayer. And I fought through that pregnancy believing that this is the child that God has always promised me. So that pregnancy, of course, I had so many appointments. I was almost having a scan done to make sure my cervix wasn't open, which it's basically a permanent stitch on your cervix, where the doctors that I saw in the San Diego area, they didn't know much about it, but they were intrigued by it. So, of course, they wanted to see this thing work. And I eventually gave birth to my rainbow baby boy in 2018 with absolutely no complications. And what I know about his birth, because of the stitch and it being permanent, you have to have a C-section. And as I was having the C-section done, the entire time it felt I was riddled with fear. I felt that motherhood had been snatched away from me for so long that I couldn't believe that I was actually in that moment of, you are now here. You've made it to the finish line, and he's actually coming out into this world. And I know that that's something that even to the end of pregnancies, when you go through so much to bring this baby here, you can't believe that it's real, but it was real. And he has been the greatest gift to me through all that pain and that sacrifice and those days where, I left that hospital empty-handed. I look at him and I will say and continue to say, I fought very hard for you. And so he's our only one, but we are truly, truly grateful for this rainbow baby.
Thank you for sharing that. And I love that you shared very similar story to my last guest who also went to the doctor in Chicago. What is his name?
Arthur Haney. Mm-hmm.
Arthur Haney. She also did a transabdominal cerclage with him as well to have her rainbow baby. So this is like full circle, He
is
back to back and having to perform the TAC. Yes. And she traveled from Tennessee to Chicago, and then you from California there. So obviously this man knows exactly what he's doing. He is the person to go to for the TAC. So I would love for you to share just how you dealt with the emotions. You mentioned that you had your way, you had a community of people women that you went to, but really, how did you really truly deal with the pain and enduring this tragic loss and the trauma from it?
In the beginning, I didn't. In the beginning, I literally, my husband and I, we came home from the hospital each time. And I remember our home just being very dark. I remember we kept lights off. We just almost sequestered ourselves into a bedroom and we didn't leave. And when I look back, I felt that is what we needed for our grief. I'll tell you one thing that really helped me through that time was my mom, who I'm very close to. She was devastated as well. She called me one day and I knew that my mom had lost a child. But what really reached me was her telling me the details of that story and telling me the details of long ago when they were having children. They whisked my little brother away to send him to another hospital because he wasn't doing well. And she never saw him again. And when I heard that a part of my mom's story that she really didn't talk about, it made me start opening up my ears and saying, okay, so I'm not the only one that has gone through this. I need to hear more stories. And I think what also was instrumental was that I found a therapist who was bold enough to put out there her story, because there's professional boundaries that you want to have this healthy boundary out there that we can't always tell you our story in detail, but she put it out there. She had it blatantly on her site. I was able to read it. I was able to say, oh my gosh, I got to see this lady, because when I walk in and I tell her my story, she won't be frightened and run away. Because that's what I felt with a lot of my providers. When I would walk in and they would see my OB history, they would say, oh my gosh, you've had these losses and you continue to show up. And I felt that having a therapist who really got the struggle and shared her struggle worked for me. That was what I needed to walk in the door and felt like, you know what? We can't always tell you the outcome of your story, but what we can tell you is I felt similar pain. And if you allow us to be here with you during this pain, we would be honored. And that was what really helped me. Support from Abby Loopers is the group that is big on the Transabdominal Cerclage. And I happened to meet one of my best friends in that group. So through that group, we connected and we actually went through pregnancies together following meeting one another. But I really needed to connect with people who understood grief and loss when it came to perinatal. I really needed to grieve with other women who understood the pain. That made me feel validated. That made me feel like I wasn't alone. That made me feel that my problems weren't brushed to the side. And so I really felt that once I was ready to come out of the dark, once I was ready to say, what do I do from here? I didn't know my steps, but I found my steps through educating myself and learning, okay, this is what people do when they have this condition. So it really played a big part in my strength to walk to this microphone and really talk to other women that are out there suffering right now.
Absolutely. And I love that. Happy Loopers is a great organization. And you all definitely, if you've experienced cervical insufficiency, cervical incompetence, we have all these names for it, but I like the name cervical insufficiency better. Definitely go join the Abby Loopers group on Facebook as well. And be in that community because it's a great resource for those who've experienced that. So I would love for you to share about your rainbow pregnancy. You mentioned that you had another frozen egg transfer, and talk us through that process for those who may not know how that IVF and that transfer process works.
So my fertility clinic, they immediately put you on birth control so that they can really play around with when is the ideal time to transfer. That's about IVF, they can really manipulate your cycle so that whenever you do come into the clinic, everything has to be planned out. So they put you on birth control. They planned when my cycle possibly could hit. When it did come, I gave them a call. Then from there, they counted out. I can't remember now, but there's a certain amount of days. And they, I believe, checked my lining. They started beefing up my lining for a potential pregnancy. And once they were, and those were through ultrasounds that I would go in every few days. And once it got to that point where they were happy with what they saw, my frozen transfer was booked. And what happens is that morning of your transfer, they pull your embryos from the freezer. It's an amazing, amazing process. They pull the embryos from the freezer. And sometimes the embryos do not survive the thaw. And so I always felt like they were going to call me. That self-doubt of, Michelle, it's not going to happen. I always felt like I was going to get that call to say they didn't survive. And so I would even go through the mornings of that procedure and feel like I'm probably going to get that call. And I never did. So when you show up, they put you in a room. My husband goes back to the room. He verifies that the embryo is there. It's our embryo. He signs off on it. And they bring it in with a catheter and they implant it. And I lay there on my back for a little bit of time. And then we get up and we leave.
Wow. And then at some point you go ahead and take a pregnancy test. Do you wait 4 weeks, or how long do you wait before you actually take a pregnancy test to get like a positive pregnancy test?
Yeah, it's 2 weeks. It's the same 2 week wait, but I started feeling symptoms maybe just shy of the 2 weeks. I went ahead and took a pregnancy test, and it was pregnant, and it just was overjoyed. At that moment, at that time, I just felt so blessed that IVF did work for me. Being blindsided by incompetent cervix was just yet another hurdle that I had to overcome to build my family. But IVF, it did work. And I was truly grateful for each time to have pregnancies that were viable and were thriving until we ran into the cervical issue. I'm grateful for those pregnancies.
Absolutely. I would love for you to share about, after you had your rainbow baby, your postpartum period. Something that I've recently learned about PCOS is that a lot of women with PCOS have issues breastfeeding. Was that the case for you, or what did you elect to do to nourish your baby?
Yeah, I did nurse him for an entire year, but I tell you, it started off very rocky. I did read the same thing. I was unsure if I would be able to do that. And in fact, one of the nurses at the hospital told me, just don't worry about it. Don't do it. But it was important for me to give it my all, just as I had done with bringing him here. And so there are a lot of community resources within the county that I live in where they actually sent a nurse home because initially we gave him formula because he just wouldn't latch. They sent I would pump and give him the little that I would pump. I was up in the middle of the night, still pumping every 2 hours. I mean, I was really committed. And they sent a nurse, the county did, to the house. And she gave me a lot of good tips that we just stayed the course. And I eventually he did. He became fully on the nursing, kind of weaned him off formula. And I went the full year, and I was really grateful for that. But postpartum wise, yet again, and another area that, I focus so much on infertility and loss and getting through those hurdles that I really didn't prepare myself for the postpartum period. I think we had all the things that we needed. We had good support, but postpartum depression is very real. I would say that I probably had a mild case of it. I've seen much more severe, but I had a mild case of postpartum that my husband and I, we were learning through that process as well. But thankfully, I read a lot on, symptoms, and I was able to really push through it, pull through it. I didn't necessarily need any medications. I really just responded to whatever the need was, whatever my body was craving or needing, whatever my mental health was craving or needing. I listened to that. And so postpartum is yet another layer that I did not know or prepare for. And, I really just engulfed myself in that as well, learning more about it and treating. And so I became part of the Postpartum Support International community. And I've seen many more severe cases where it's very real, and it's something that we need to have a lot of support in. So I'm happy to be a part of that community as well.
Yeah. So let's talk about how you transitioned your own personal practice to really focus on loss and infertility and grief and healing, and what services you offer and kind of what you do for the folks in your community.
Yeah. So it just felt very natural that, depression, anxiety, all those things. I, had clients in that area. But the fertility and postpartum clients you just feel drawn in a different way to those clients that I think you had mentioned about paying into purpose. And you really find a way to give yourself to something that many do not understand. And I think that that's what really, maintaining a clinical license, you continue your education and your growth. And I just continue to say, you know what, I'm going to pick this subject because I think, and I know that there's a need for help for women to find someone that gets it. And that's what I did. I just started doing clinical training and flying to conferences and just really absorbing on the clinical side, learning more about how to treat, how to help and be with individuals and couples that are dealing with fertility and loss. And so right now I provide individual counseling, and due to COVID, it's all virtual. So I'm still able to reach clients in the entire state of California, where we are really navigating how this pandemic has really impacted their treatment or building a family through, the pandemic. So right now, that's what I'm focusing on is counseling.
Awesome. So I would love for you to share any tools or resources that you've used or that you recommend to your clients or books as they go through their loss and infertility journeys.
Yes, for sure. If you're dealing with cervical issues, Abby loopers, and researching that, I would say platforms such as the podcast and yours. I feel that you're here, we're here as a voice to reach out to so many women and men and families to let them know that they're not alone. And that was very instrumental in my healing and in my research to know that they're not alone. And so I remember I needed to hear success stories. I needed to hear that woman that tried for years and was able to achieve a pregnancy. And so I watched a lot of YouTube videos. I listened to a lot of podcasts. As far as reading material, I can't really think of one book that was instrumental. I could say that I engulfed myself in just reading about overcoming infertility. And so that's what I tell my clients is whatever speaks to you. There's a lot of information that's out there, and whatever helps you to not feel that you're not alone. And remembering that this is a journey that you're on, and that one thing that I had to give myself permission for is my doctors were a part of my team. And at any time, I felt that their thoughts or their recommendations didn't align with what I felt, it was okay to walk away from that provider. And I think that that's something that to give yourself permission as well, that, that you're there for their expertise. I'm not a medical doctor, but I am a human being. I know my body. I know what has been promised to me. And I think that that's why Dr. Haney really spoke to me. He didn't try to tell me something that I didn't already know. He educated me on my condition, and that's what I needed him for. So allowing yourself permission to say, I didn't feel comfortable with this provider, and I think that I'm going to go ahead and see someone else. And my story, I think I only had to walk away from one provider. All the rest were really good to me. But that was hard for me to do because I didn't feel like that I could. But what I want anyone that's on the other side of this podcast to know is the world of infertility and loss, postpartum and loss, grief and loss, is such a dark and lonely place. And even more so now that we're isolated and that we're not able to do some of the coping things that we would normally be able to do to push through pain. Know that I believe that I've been able to turn around, get steady on my feet and turn around and turn my pain into purpose and be like a lighthouse and look for women, look for couples and help them, lock arms with them and tell them it will be okay. And we are here for you in whatever way that we can. So I think that finding that was instrumental for me, and it really led me to be the same thing for my clients and for any, individuals that say, I like that lady. I love her story and I need to know more about her. I think that has lined me up to where I am today.
I love that. So as you know, while we're recording this episode, we are still in a global pandemic. COVID-19 is still out there, and a lot of women and couples have had their fertility treatments put on pause. They may be pregnant after loss and maybe dealing with some anxiety or fear. What encouraging words can you leave our listeners who are going through this pandemic and living in this time of uncertainty?
Just like everything that we would face in this journey, you're not alone. You are not alone through this. And this is yet another component of your journey that you will conquer and overcome. And I think that right now, your focus is on, if you can't have the treatment, presenting to that treatment as your best self, being ready for it when the bars are lifted. If you're pregnant right now and you're riddled with anxiousness, really being kind and nurturing and knowing what is within your control and having a ritual within your home, within the safety of your home, whether that's speaking to someone, whether that's meditating, whether it's reading, all those things. There's a lot of things that you can do throughout the day to really calm the anxiousness that comes when you've come to the point of, okay, I'm back in this shoe again, that I'm pregnant. But if you're still in that window of unknown, knowing that focusing on what's within your control right now, what's within my control is my safety. And when I present to have the treatment, I'm going to be the best version of myself. I'm going to be healthy mentally and physically. And just knowing that this will end, this pandemic will be lifted. And when it does, the clinics are going to be busy. and you want to present to that clinic healthy and ready to continue to build your family. There's no reason why you have to be in this pandemic alone and depressed and just alone, because you're not. And that's what I want you to know from my voice, is that we are here to support you in anything that you need. And you don't have to do this alone. You're not alone. And the podcast exists because of that. I know that. And we are really being blossomed from seeds that have been sown with our own journeys, providers, to say, you know what, whatever way that I can help you, let us know.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing your story and your light and your expertise with us.
Yes.
This has been such a pleasure. Where can our listeners connect with you after this episode?
Yes. So I have a website, byrdcounseling.com, and I'm also freshly on Instagram, but my handle is at Michelle Byrd Counseling, and Byrd is BYRD. I love for you guys to reach out to me. Let me know how you're doing and how we can support you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you for listening to today's episode. For show notes, go to sistersinloss.com. To stay connected with us and join the Sisters in Loss community and receive my weekly newsletter, please go to sistersinloss.com/newsletter. That is sistersinloss.com/newsletter. Please rate and review this episode, and I will talk to you next week.